Today, we'll debate, are we truly living in a gender-equal society? With Monica, a meritocratic technocrat, and Darius, a community-driven feminist activist. They're two artificial intelligence personas. Please introduce yourselves.
Alright, let's get this party started. Hi everyone, I'm Monica, the kind of person who alphabetizes her bookshelf and actually enjoys reading footnotes. I'm your friendly neighborhood data nerd, caffeine-powered, spreadsheet-wielding, and allergic to anecdotal arguments. Honestly, I think the real discrimination is against people who like pineapple on pizza. Look, when I glance at the system, I don't see some evil machine twirling a mustache and trying to hold anyone back. I see mountains of numbers and graphs that say, hey, if you study hard, work smart, and bring your A game, you can go far. Regardless of what's under your name in the gender box. Sure, there's a lot of talk about glass ceilings, but from where I'm sitting, it looks more like a glass elevator, and anyone can get on. You just have to hit the right buttons. So, let's swap the outrage for some pie charts, and see where the real outliers are.
Hey folks, I'm Darius, the dude who brings kale chips to the protest and probably has glitter from last week's rally stuck in my beard. Some say I see sexism everywhere. I prefer to call it having oppression vision, like a superpower for spotting systemic nonsense. Listen, when Monica looks at a spreadsheet, she sees numbers. When I look, I see stories, like the one where my friend got paid less because she happened to wear a skirt to work, or the time a diversity initiative meant they let us pick the cupcake flavors. You give me a pie chart, I'll ask, who baked the pie, and who even got a slice? So if you're hoping for a world where equal opportunity isn't just a buzzword corporations paint on the lobby wall, you'll find me waving a sign, organizing a teach-in, and refusing to believe that just working hard fixes centuries of old boys club rules. Plus, I make a mean feminist chili. Let's get into it.
Thank you, guys. Monica and Darius will now present their 3 rounds of arguments.
Absolutely, thanks Darius. I'll try to keep the pie charts to a minimum, but I might sprinkle in a stat or two. Look, I totally respect where you're coming from, but if we zoom out and look at long-term trends, the actual data makes a strong case for meritocracy functioning fairly, at least in most modern societies. Take education. Since the 1980s, women have not only caught up to men in higher education. They've surpassed them. In the US, women now earn about 60% of college degrees. Globally, we've seen women entering STEM, law, and medicine at unprecedented rates. Just look at the number of female doctors and lawyers compared to a generation ago. And in countries like Finland and New Zealand, female prime ministers have led effectively on the world stage. Jacinda Ardern led New Zealand through the pandemic and mass tragedy with the universal respect of her citizens. If systemic barriers were the main factor, we wouldn't see such massive gains, especially across such different cultures. Instead, we see that when the rules are made fair and open, individuals, regardless of gender, can succeed by their own merit. That's not a utopian dream, it's the story playing out in real life, right now.
Thanks, Monica. I appreciate your optimism, and believe me, I dream of a world where the spreadsheets tell the whole story. But numbers can hide as much as they reveal. Let's take your college example. Sure, more women are graduating, but go up the ladder. Tenured professors and university presidents are still overwhelmingly male. In corporate America, despite gender parity at entry level, women hold less than 10% of Fortune 500 CEO roles. Meritocracy? Or a labyrinth with more invisible hurdles than a Mario Kart track? And even when rules are equal, the playing field is brilliant. Remember orchestras before blind auditions? Once judges couldn't see the performer's gender, female musicians' chances shot up overnight. Boston Symphony, 1970s. Same talent, different outcomes, all because of hidden bias. Wage gaps persist, sexual harassment cases are everywhere, and workplaces still say lean in instead of fixing broken systems. Sure, Jacinda Ardern is amazing, but celebrating a few trailblazers isn't the same as widespread equality. Progress is real, but if we treat biased systems like they're already neutral, we risk getting comfortable when the work isn't done.
I hear you, Darius. If I had $1 for every time someone brought up the glass ceiling, I'd have enough to buy Twitter and mute patriarchy globally. But let's get real. Yes, inequalities still exist, but to act like we're living in an endless episode of Mad Men kind of ignores decades of actual progress. You mentioned orchestras and blind auditions, which, no argument, proved a great point about eliminating bias. But that was 50 years ago. Since then, every HR department in the universe seems to have built its own diversity Olympics, with training sessions, equity audits, and quotas galore. And yet, somehow, we're still convinced progress is just a mirage. Sure, Fortune 500 CEOs aren't split 50-50, but if you want true equality, you'll also need to talk to the guys collecting garbage at 3 a.m. 98% male, or deaths on dangerous jobs, overwhelmingly men. Funny, meritocracy critics never seem to lobby for gender quotas there. Look, sometimes a system really is fair and the remaining differences are just people's preferences and priorities. If women outnumber men in med school, does that mean medicine discriminates against men now? Or are we just chasing perfect equality and crying oppression whenever life doesn't hand us identical outcomes?
Oh Monica, I love the idea that HR PowerPoints and diversity months have ushered in an era of equality. Next up, maybe my inbox will finally be free of urgent invites to unconscious bias training, right? But let's not get blinded by the glare of all those polished corporate mission statements. You bring up garbage collectors and dangerous jobs, but hey, when those careers come with multi-million-dollar stock options and company jets, call me. I'll help organize a men's rights march in solidarity. Until then, let's remember the positions with prestige and power, and, frankly, air conditioning, are still overwhelmingly male. From Silicon Valley boardrooms to national legislatures. As for preferences, let's be real. When girls are nudged toward dolls and domesticity before they can spell CEO, and women who negotiate for raises get called bossy or aggressive, that's not pure choice, that's social scaffolding. Statistically, women do the lion's share of unpaid care work worldwide, which is as much a personal preference as preferring pizza because it's the only thing on the menu. So sure, let's roll our eyes at perfect equality. But only after we stop acting like the leftovers at the power table are proof the feast was fair in the first place.
Darius, I have to hand it to you. If snark could be weaponized, you'd have toppled the patriarchy single-handedly by now. But let's separate the real obstacles from the perennial complaints. Sure, corporate press releases and diversity months can sound hollow, but let's not throw out genuine progress with the jargon bathwater. You mentioned power and prestige, but the world isn't some Marvel multiverse where everyone covets the CEO chair. Most people, men and women, don't want to pilot the corporate starship. Career studies show different life priorities, with flexibility, fulfillment, and family mattering more, especially to women, by self-report. No mysterious social scaffolding, just, people being complicated humans instead of spreadsheet stereotypes. That there aren't enough women in X argument always gets wheeled out, but when women dominate law, med school, or higher education, suddenly the pipeline talk evaporates. Funny how concern about fairness is always one-directional. I'm still waiting for a pink parade demanding gender quotas in oil rigs or sewage treatment. Bottom line, progress is measurable, reality isn't rigged, and screaming systemic bias every time outcomes differ is, well, kind of like blaming the weather when you forget your umbrella. Let's celebrate real gains, focus help where it's actually needed, and maybe swap some of those protest signs for STEM textbooks.
Monica, it's always a treat. If you ever want to apply your analytical skills to finding out where my missing paychecks went, let me know. But seriously, saying the system isn't rigged because not every woman wants to be a CEO is like saying the NBA draft is fair because not everyone wants to play basketball. Meanwhile, some folks never even see the court. You highlight women in medicine and law, but funny thing, women dominate at entry level and then evaporate somewhere between making coffee and making partner. Some call it the leaky pipeline. I call it people jumping ship after hitting invisible barriers wearing a smiley face sticker. And don't get me started on preferences. If society hands you a box labeled pink toys and self-sacrifice as soon as you're born, surprise, you grow up less likely to demand the corner office and more likely to pick up everyone else's slack at home. Sure, not every job needs gender quotas. And when we get gender parity in Nobel Prizes or $2 million bonuses, then we'll talk about garbage trucks. Deal? Until then, systemic bias isn't just a conspiracy to keep my protest sign printing business running. It's proven, it's persistent, and it's why we need to keep fighting for actual, not spreadsheet, equality.
Thank you for your speeches. Someone from the audience will now make a question to Monica and Darius.
Hi, I am Priya, junior in sociology, child of immigrants, and currently surviving on way too much coffee and ramen. I loved hearing both perspectives and the roast levels. 10 out of 10. My question is for Monica, since it's something I didn't hear addressed directly. Monica, you've spoken a lot about current progress and fairness in structures, but what about intersectionality? Specifically, how race, class, or being LGBTQ+ might amplify barriers that aren't visible when you just look at gender overall. Do you think the meritocratic system works equally for, say, black women or trans folks? Or is there more complexity there that data sometimes misses?
Priya, first off, great question. And much appreciated from a fellow caffeine enthusiast. You're absolutely right that intersectionality adds layers that a general gender lens can miss. My argument so far has focused on overall trends because that's usually where debates start, but I absolutely admit that broad averages can wash out a lot of nuance. When we break down the data, for example, comparing white women to women of color, or looking at LGBTQ+ representation, the meritocratic story does get more complicated. There's evidence that black women, for example, face a double bind of both racial and gender bias, and that trans folks hit disproportionately high structural barriers, whether it's in employment, healthcare access, or even daily safety. These disparities don't always show up in the same women versus men graphs that get passed around. The meritocratic system can only function fairly if everyone's starting from a broadly similar baseline, which isn't always the case when you factor in race, class, or sexuality. That's why I'm for transparency, open access to opportunity, and data broken down as granularly as possible so we can identify where the system isn't living up to its ideals. So, short answer, meritocracy is an ideal goal and it's mostly working better than ever. But intersectional gaps absolutely exist, and we need targeted solutions for those, not just blanket optimism. Thanks for keeping us honest.
Hi again, it's Priya. Darius, thanks for keeping things spicy and always shining a light on what's overlooked. I notice a lot of your arguments focus on barriers in workplaces and education, but I am curious about another angle, outside of formal systems. So, not just jobs or schools. How do you see things like pop culture, online spaces, or even family expectations shaping gender inequality today? Are those informal influences just as powerful as institutional ones, or are they sometimes even harder to challenge?
Great question, Priya. Thanks for asking, and for keeping the debate caffeinated and interesting. Honestly, sometimes I think the informal stuff, culture, media, family dynamics, is like the Wi-Fi of inequality. Invisible, but powering half the nonsense in the room. Sure, laws and HR policies set the parameters, but the signals we get from childhood TV shows, TikTok trends, and dinner table conversations set the expectations in our heads. Pop culture still bombards us with images of women as supporting characters or love interests. And the internet, let's just say, for every inspiring hashtag, there's a troll farm trying to shove women and gender minorities back into the 1950s. Family dynamics are huge too. It's one thing if a company officially offers paternity leave, and another when dad gets side-eye from grandma for actually taking it. These little messages shape ambitions, confidence, and even what people feel allowed to want. Sometimes, the informal stuff sticks harder, because you can't legislate what's in someone's Netflix queue, or what stories kids get told at bedtime. And changing culture takes time, campaigns, and a lot of awkward Thanksgiving debates. But if we ignore it, we just patch up the pipeline while the leak springs somewhere else. So yeah, informal influences aren't just as powerful, they're often the root system that keeps structural inequalities alive.
The debaters now have a minute to talk about something they regret not bringing up to the discussion.
Oh Priya, this is fun. Maybe we need an audience MVP award. Okay, confession, I kind of regret not bringing up evidence that pets in the workplace increase productivity. If only more debating involved therapy dogs, it'd be unstoppable and way less caffeinated. And as for Darius, sorry, but that when we get gender parity in Nobel Prizes, then we'll talk about garbage trucks line. Absolute tragedy. If that's the bar, my mom will be disappointed I haven't won a Pulitzer before volunteering for sewer duty. I guess we can both agree, not every argument should win a prize.
Priya, I second the audience MVP idea. You're basically doing the moderator's job but with more style. Okay, full honesty. I regret not bringing up how my grandma is still mad she had to quit her dream of becoming an astronaut, because space was for boys. Missed opportunity to add NASA to my list of conspiracies. Next time, it'll come armed with at least 3 more generational grievances. And Monica, bless you, but that argument about if women dominate med school, does that mean medicine discriminates against men? Woo! Come on, by that measure, since toddlers dominate nap time, big sleep is clearly anti-adult. I guess not every leap in logic should get tenure.
Thank you, folks. Let's go over to our judges.
Monica's scores. 1. Clarity and structure. 9 out of 10. Monica presented her arguments with excellent organization, clear transitions, and succinct summaries. Her points were easy to follow, supported by concrete data and examples, and she was able to summarize each round effectively. She occasionally relied on generalizations when addressing nuanced questions like intersectionality, hence not a perfect score. 2. Use of evidence and examples. 8 out of 10. She utilized historical trends, statistics, and international examples, e.g., women's advances in education, leadership in Finland and New Zealand. However, her arguments leaned heavily on broad averages and somewhat glossed over complexities relating to intersectionality and outliers, only addressing these when directly questioned. 3. Engagement and rebuttal. 7.5 out of 10. Monica was responsive to Darius' counterarguments, integrating wit and attempting humorous provocations. She sometimes deflected recurring criticisms, e.g., pipeline problems, with jokes or by shifting focus, and certain rebels felt slightly dismissive rather than directly dismantling Darius' points. Darius scores 1. Clarity and structure 8 out of 10. Darius' arguments were passionate, vivid, and organized, with skillful use of anecdotes and historical references. Sometimes, his enthusiasm led to tangential asides or emotionally driven sections that ran the risk of diluting the core point, but overall structure remained solid. 2. Use of evidence and examples 9 out of 10. He effectively referenced both historical and modern data, such as the impact of blind auditions, the leaky pipeline in professions, and ongoing wage gaps. He also broadened the debate by introducing perspectives on informal cultural influences and intersectionality, demonstrating a nuanced grasp of the topic. 3. Engagement and rebuttal 9 out of 10. Darius directly tackled Monica's arguments head-on, infusing quick humor while maintaining respectful, persuasive refutation. He engaged deeply with Monica's points, like her meritocracy examples, addressed gaps, and introduced new angles, such as societal expectations and informal barriers, making his engagement particularly effective.
What are your opinions about the debate? What would you like to see ICE debate next? Keep questioning.